So when I got to Australia, I realised, and I also talked to Professor Don Anderson, who was at Sydney Uni at the time, and I realised that together with talking to Don, was that the fauna here just wasn't known. There had never been a polychaeta worker here at the Australian Museum or any other museum in Australia at that time. So I spent those first few years basically going out and collecting. And I've continued to do that until very, very recently. I think I've been fortunate that I've seen probably a large proportion of the Australian coast collecting. And so we have built up an enormous collection here at the Australian Museum, and it's very well curated in terms of being registered and available. And increasingly now when we sample, we collect stuff for both morphological and molecular. But it's really, I don't know how many new species I've described, but it's quite a large number. We're talking about 500 or 600 species in new genera. But I've also, so for the first 20 years of my life, or 20 years, or perhaps 15 years of my time here, I was basically going out there and collecting. And I started, because I was a bit isolated here in Australia, there weren't other polychaeta people to talk to. Whereas I'd come out of a lab where there was something like 10 or 12 people. We used to have worm nights at the prof's house because he was too busy to come to the lab. So once a month we'd go to his house and he'd supply the beer and the chips or something because he wanted to know what we were all doing. So suddenly I was here in Australia not with nobody to talk to. So it soon became obvious that I needed to collaborate with people. And so I started working with ecologists at fisheries and universities, and I would identify their animals for them so that when they did their ecology, they actually had proper names. And then gradually, perhaps I started to attract students, and some of those students have now become curators in their own right, say in Darwin and in Melbourne, but also attracted a lot of other PhD students, not only from Australia, but from overseas to come and work with me. And I really enjoy working in that collaborative way. So the value of our collection is, first of all, it's well curated, but it's also, we make it available to other people, which really encourages people from other parts of the world to come to Australia. I mean, I've just had a Spanish PhD student, and he had this vision that he needed to come to Australia. And so we got him a scholarship, and he submitted last week. So, there's a lot of attraction for people. Last year I have a French student who unfortunately came for 9 months but had to leave because of COVID. But Nicholas said, I wanted to come and work with you and collaborate. And it's so much easier to talk to somebody face to face. I think the other thing that I initiated, because we had these collections, was back in 1983. The museum had been having a regular series of international meetings. We had one on mollusks, one on echinoderms, and there was a fish. And I thought, hang on, why don't we have one on worms? We'd never had a polychaeta international conference. So the year before, I went around to colleagues in Los Angeles and in Washington, DC, then in London and in Europe. And I said, if I ran a conference in Sydney, would you come? Yes, please. And this was before the internet. So with the support of the then director, Des Griffin, we got money to come. And we got something like 96 people came from something like 20 countries. And we had a ball. It was just a week. And then I took some of them to Lizard Island for a 2-week workshop. And that started, as a result of that, we ended up with the International Polychaeta Association. and the next meeting was in Copenhagen. And we've had meetings every 3 years since that. Anyhow, back in something like 2010, we were all at Lecce in Italy. And somebody said, you know, where are we going to have the next polychaeta conference? And I thought, okay, it's 30 years later. Why don't we... And once I said, I'm interested in running another polychaeta conference. Nobody else competed. They said, right, we're coming. So in 2013, we had another one here in Sydney. We had 160 people at that conference, and from all over the world. And these conferences, not only just, you get to know people, and then it's much easier to collaborate. And of course, there's the internet now, which there wasn't in '83. And then we ran a workshop at Lizard Island for 2 weeks. And we got money from the Lizard Island Reef Research Foundation, and we took 17 people to Lizard for 2 weeks. And we ended up describing 96 new species as a result of those 2 weeks. And there's more since, but there's a big 900-page volume of zootaxa. But what I'm saying is that once you develop all these contacts, people say, right, I want to come to Sydney to work on your collections because the material's here. It's been well curated, it's got lots of labels, it's got, you know, from a variety of habitats. So that I think it's fair to say that a significant proportion of polychaeta taxonomists around the world have spent time here in Sydney. And so not only is it good for them, they describe new species, but it means that our collection is continually being worked upon. And that's the value of collections. We can use these collections to see how species distributions are changing over time with climate, because as the water warms, a lot of those worms are going to come further south.